Welcome to episode 191 of the weekly Shared Security Show. And joining me this week is my co-host, or as Kevin would say, my sidekick, the one and only Scott Wright.
Yeah, that's fighting words, I guess. No, well, too bad Kevin's not here to defend himself. We could introduce him as anybody we want to, I guess.
Oh yeah, Kevin could be anybody today, for sure. Because Kevin is at a conference in Michigan called GurCon. It's a security conference
in meat space.
Yes, with actual real people. So,
cool.
Yep, but he'll be back probably next week. Yeah. So,
and I'm actually here and animated and audible and everything this week.
Yeah, you are.
I don't have to. I was a little picture on the panels.
I don't have to use an image or little captions for Scott. I don't have to make anything up for you. You could actually speak for yourself.
There you go. Yeah, I like Tom's putting little captions on my head. That was funny. Well done.
Well, good to have you back here in on video and audio and
great to be here. Lots of good stuff to talk about this week.
We do. There's been lots of breaking news, news that's affected really everybody. I think this week, at least anybody that has an iPhone. So you've heard in the news about this new zero-click exploit that was uncovered by a group called the Citizen Lab, which is actually
in
Toronto.
That's right, here in Canada.
Yep, Canadian-based nonprofit that does a lot of great work uncovering a lot of these, types of attacks that happen against journalists and human rights
dissidents
activists. And so we've mentioned these guys in their research in the past on the show, but they had discovered this new exploit through a phone of a Saudi activist that had this malware installed. Of course, this is now being linked back to the infamous NSO group, which has created the Pegasus spyware that we all know and maybe not love, but
it's been around for quite a while, right?
All Several the time, years. A long time.
Yeah.
And really the message here, first of all, is if you own any type of Apple device, because this affects more than just an iPhone. It affects macOS. It affects watchOS. So any type of Apple product needs to be updated right away. Because
so if I drop off, it's just because I'm rebooting my Mac.
Okay.
No, I'm just kidding. I'm trying to update.
yeah. Maybe not right now, Scott.
Oh, okay. All
right. But if you're a good security person, you've already updated it.
Yeah, I think it's already updated.
Of course it is. Yes. But and I think what's important to also understand is what we mean by zero click. This is pretty serious. Meaning, if you receive a text message, you just have to open up the text message and it's exploited. You don't have to take any action at all.
Yeah, I think of it on a couple of levels. Zero click could mean, yes, I only have to open the message. I don't have to click on a link in the message. So that's dangerous. There's another kind of zero click where if it actually gets received by that piece of software without you even opening it, if it's sitting in there, the queue, something might be processing it and it could actually have vulnerabilities at that level. So you might not even have to open something. Yeah.
Exactly. So these are probably the most dangerous types of exploits that we've seen because of that fact, where there's no user action that's required. So just a reason why we always talk about updating your devices whenever an update comes out to protect against these types of these exploits. But this is a continuing problem. We've seen with the NSO group, I'm sure this is not going to be the last time that we hear about something like this. This group in particular will sell these types of exploits and vulnerabilities, to really the highest bidder. And oftentimes that's a nation state that likes to target people like journalists and others.
Yeah.
So I'd say the risk from just a, regular user perspective is probably very minimal that you're going to be targeted by an attack like this. But as we've seen, if this exploit code gets out or it's distributed outside of the NSO group,
Yeah.
malware and other people
Yeah.
are going to take advantage of this.
And certainly if you are able to self-identify as a potential target of somebody, then there's a lot more reason for you to be very concerned about this kind of thing.
Absolutely. So if you own an Apple device, patch it right away.
This
Make
isn't
sure
the
you do
same
that.
kind of thing as a few weeks ago when you're saying reboot your Apple device or your iPhone so that the malware that might be on it gets deleted. But yeah,
Right, but that also is good. It's a
it is
good
good advice.
security hygiene practice to
Yeah.
get into. Just like you would reboot your laptop, you should also reboot your mobile phone,
Because
especially your mobile phone.
there might be
Yeah,
malware just in memory, right? That
that's
only resides
correct.
there until it gets to the next reboot.
That's correct, and especially because I think we just tend to leave our phone on all the
Yeah.
time. I mean, just think about the last time you rebooted your phone,
Yeah.
and you might think, "Wow, it's probably months ago." And so it's just good hygiene to get involved.
I miss my old BlackBerry. You used to be able to program it to turn itself off at 10
I
p.m. and then
remember
back
that.
on at 6.
Yeah. Wow, I'm old. I remember BlackBerry. Yeah,
That
that
was
used
my
to be
favorite, man.
It was. It was like the top of technology back in the day.
It was. Yeah.
But
Good old days.
good old days. So this Guntrader Firearms data. Now, Scott, I know you had recently you did a blog post about this, but this next story, maybe you can tell our audience a little bit about
Yeah.
this, the importance of this story.
Yeah, I think we may have covered this or touched on it in a past episode a week or two ago with Kevin. But I think the main thing I got out of it was, it's a really good learning opportunity for senior executives, managers who may be a little less, prone to spending or investing money in security. There are several studies that come out that show IT teams think that executives don't understand. There's a gap between what the real risks are and what executives think there are. So this kind of a story really illustrates why it's important to have executives that are sensitive to risks.
And what happened here?
So in this particular case, the Guntrader website in the UK, think of it as kind of like a Craigslist or it's a targeted, bad use of words, forum for people that want to trade firearms in the UK. And so think of it as, I want to buy, a rifle from somebody a certain kind, and I see one advertised. And the person advertising typically would put in maybe their zip code or postal code in the UK. And, that's at least vague enough. You don't know exactly which house it is. But for some reason, this website collected the exact addresses. It's not clear to me. Maybe there's more information out there about whether it was GPS or address, postal address. In any case, it was very precise data that could locate a particular home, for example. And it was really, I think, just for the aid of buyers and sellers to understand where the other party was, whether it was close by or whether they have to drive 4 hours to get there, right? So there's really no reason for them to actually have that amount of precision in the location data.
No.
But the risk was really apparent because when you look at it and you say, okay, well, it only affects the people that are trading in these firearms and, maybe they get what they deserve. But the problem is what happens if somebody moves from that house that had that location data where there was presumably some firearms, either about to be or already. And what happened then was all that data got stolen by an activist group. It was an animal rights activist group. And their only intent was to publish information or shame the people who were, buying firearms around the kinds of controversial hunts that go on and things like that. So that was the intent of the breach. But then somebody took the data and made it into a fully usable Google Earth plotting. So you could literally see the addresses of every gun owner that was registered on the website. And so, as I said, if that gun owner moves and some innocent or non-gun owner moves in, then the criminals who are likely to be targeting all of those locations to rob them of their firearms. Could be, bursting in on people who don't even have the guns.
Absolutely.
And so it's just an illustrated example of how you can easily spot this kind of risk by doing a simple sort of what I call a risk management analysis. And it's just looking at what is the data we're collecting and what's the worst case of what somebody could do with it, right? And it's really not that hard for somebody who understands information security risk management to put, guns, that's a valuable asset to somebody, right? And geographic locations together in a database. And you say, wow, that could be really valuable to somebody. Who could it be valuable to? Oh, criminals. And what would they do with it? Well, they might actually break into the houses of the people who who own those guns. So it's not only, danger to the people who are using the site, but the people who, as sort of collateral damage, another bad pun, but those kinds of things where it just illustrates how easy it is sometimes to be able to spot where the risks are that really should be addressed before you allow a site or an application to be published.
Yeah, it really adds a lot of validity to threat modeling. Risk, doing a risk assessment is one way, of course. And I think of just application security and the need for threat modeling, which has kind of been almost a lost art in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm.
It's starting to come back now with, we've seen changes with the way that applications are being developed. I mean, we know people are using DevOps and more faster methodologies, but I know that's something that I've been doing at work is, touting the importance of doing threat modeling to identify all of the threats to your application, even things that you never even thought about, like this.
Yeah. There are a couple of important messages that I've heard people say they really got out of that particular blog post I wrote. And that is, number one is we're really bad generally as humans in assessing risk. And Bruce Schneier's talked about it a lot, in his blogs. But I use the example of the shark attack, right? I mean, a fatal shark attack happens like once a year in the US, right? Whereas car accidents, 30,000 a year. And a lot of people are more deathly afraid of, getting attacked by a shark when they go swimming than getting in a car and dying in a car accident. So it's an illustration of, the fact that we're all pretty bad at managing risks, but managers really have to get better at this from an internet application and web communication point of view. And the other thing is, I think it's showing that, this kind of thing can be taught pretty easily in, management courses. Every management course should have an area where you talk about cyber risks and just use this kind of a thing to actually illustrate, what can go wrong and why it's important.
Absolutely. And I love just stories like this, other news stories, and there's been other ones in the past too. And I think it's really important that, we use these in conversations like you mentioned, especially talking to executives and others that just may not have that security mindset. So stories are a great way to
there are lots of data breach stories. You almost get desensitized to them, right? And they are almost all identical when there's very little known, right? It's like, well, we think it was caused by a phishing attack. Maybe it was a vulnerability in some software or whatever. But, so many records were breached. It had PII. It had, health information or social security numbers. And, there's no evidence that any of it was abused. And we're giving 1 year's credit monitoring service. That's your stock, news story about a data breach. But this one I found to be really interesting because there was more data information about the actual events and you could really analyze it. You may not be able to guess exactly what management was thinking, but you kind of get the idea they didn't really go through the proper risk management or threat modeling that you would expect.
Yep. Are you looking for the very best products to protect your digital privacy? Well, Silent Pocket has everything you need with their patented product line of high-quality Faraday bags, backpacks, clutches, and wallets. Visit silentpocket.com today and receive 10% off your order by using discount code SHAREDSECURITY.
You want your organization to be secure and compliant and to have a healthy culture, but your employees' lack of awareness makes you vulnerable to data theft, fraud, and compliance penalties. It's frustrating that the boring, static training content that's being used today has failed to improve employees' ability to defend against cyber attacks. At ClickArmor, we know that without using gamification, it's extremely hard to get staff to understand how to avoid threats. Our gamified simulations and challenges have provided a 50% average improvement in thousands of employees' ability to spot phishing threats. Go to clickarmor.ca/shared security to get your free gamified phishing assessment for up to 500 employees. You'll see quickly how gamified simulations can help your team be more resilient and compliant and help avoid costly ransomware and fraud incidents. Let ClickArmor help you go from being an underappreciated, stressed out fall guy to being an innovative leader who's the catalyst for greater productivity in your organization.
And speaking of other data breaches, and maybe another story to leverage and use in those conversations is our next story, which is about a unsecured database. So no password on a database that was publicly accessible, which leaked about 60 million records of fitness tracking information for people using Fitbit and all the different types of Apple Watches and different fitness devices through a company called Get Health, which is basically one of those data aggregators, right, of all of these different fitness devices and takes in all that data, which is there's a lot of businesses that have been starting up that are essentially collecting this data for various reasons, whether it's they have their own application to consolidate data, or maybe they take this data and they sell it off to through a data broker.
It'd be interesting to understand sort of how they get that data, how they acquire it. Is it through permissions, or an interoperability agreement between the original source sites, or how do they actually get that data, and how is what are the security controls contractually or technically around those things?
Yeah, and what's really interesting about this story in particular is because we're talking about health information, and I know here in the U.S., we have HIPAA, we have supposedly pretty strict laws around how personal health information is shared. But what's interesting about fitness devices, so Fitbit is an example. So your wearable Fitbit device, that is actually approved by the Federal Drug Administration, the FDA here in the United States, as a class 2 medical device because it takes your heart rate.
Oh, yeah.
But what's interesting is HIPAA doesn't really apply to the data until it goes into a healthcare, like a hospital or your doctor, where
it's used for treatment purposes, or
So there is kind of I don't want to say a loophole, but there's kind of a big gap in terms of, we're not regulating the data on the Fitbits, even though that is classified. If that was in a healthcare setting, like your doctor had that information, it would be considered protected. Yeah. But because it's not, it's on a device, but the device is certified, kind of the data isn't. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah. It is a really interesting area, and certainly, with all the extra resources we have to do security, analysis and and certifications and standards, I'm sure somebody will be on that soon.
Yeah. And to me, I think it's interesting how just the technology has moved so fast that government regulators just haven't been able to keep up because it's changing so quickly. I mean, have you seen the heart cardiogram trackers now that are available? That I believe Apple has one built in to their Apple Watch.
I don't think so. I haven't seen
notify you if it thinks that you're about to have a heart attack, or go into AFib and other things. And these are life-saving technology that is holding a lot of very sensitive data.
Yeah, I mean the other thing that I always think of as a risk management person is, you think of how, that stuff is very useful, obviously, from the point of view of, helping you get treatment as soon as possible. But every time we have an improvement in, convenience or useful information, there's always a vulnerability that emerges, at least, right? And so that's where the threat modeling and risk management come in. You have to look at, how could this turn out badly?
Yeah.
And so it's really interesting to see, these kinds of advancements and try and say, hey, somebody needs to look at this.
Yeah. And it's unfortunately, the device manufacturers, they don't have a whole lot of control. It's usually these third parties that are collecting this data, like everything, right? It's like when you go buy something with your credit card, you're trusting that store and that organization is protecting your credit card in that transaction. And as we've seen in the past, that always isn't the case. So
it's true. Yeah.
So I think that's a good time to end the podcast this week.
I had one other thing I wanted to mention.
You did, yes. Why don't you talk about
it? Actually, I mean, it fits really well with some of the topics we talked about. Even the most recent one, where there's cool new data and things that we can do, and potentially new vulnerabilities that could be exploited by bad guys. So, a book that I was recommended actually by a customer of mine, I hadn't heard of, but it's called "This Is How They Tell Me the World Ends," and it's by Nicole Perlroth. I'm just
we'll have that link in the show notes.
The link there for people who want to know it. It's a fairly long book. I listened on the audiobook. It's like 14 hours, but it covers everything from the beginning of the emergence of zero-day brokeraging, or how do you collect and monetize zero-day vulnerabilities? And it goes way back to, a whole bunch of early stories before 2010, before Snowden, and then all the way through how, the NSA was starting to pay big money for these things. And they had this policy called NOBUS, nobody but us. We'll decide which 0 days we want to let the vendors know about, so they fix them, but we'll keep the ones that we think, our adversaries probably won't be able to develop for a while and use them to our advantage, right? So, but the whole story evolves to the point where, the bad guys have the possibility, and I won't spoil the ending, but it's a pretty compelling story about the things that have actually already happened, where the bad guys are making use of, the NSA tools that had been doxed, essentially, or released without authorization. So it's a really compelling story. I think it's worthwhile. Cool. It tells people sort of why we're in the state we're in when it comes to the power grid vulnerabilities and stuff like that. So just recommend that one.
Nice. We'll definitely link that in the show notes. And we should put together a list of kind of recommended reading that may be kind of cool to share with our listeners. And actually, I think we've been discussing kind of creating a kind of shared security community is something that we're thinking about where we would want to put that, whether that's LinkedIn or some other application. But and I had mentioned this in our email newsletter. So if you haven't signed up for that, check out, sign up on our website for our newsletter. But we are interested in creating kind of a community that, our listeners can have conversations. We can talk, further talk about stories that were on the show, share book lists and things like that. So stay tuned for more on that, but that should be coming soon. So.
Yeah, that's awesome. Good stuff.
All right, Scott. Well, we'll end the podcast here, but thank you again for joining us this week.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. Thanks Kevin everybody for listening.
Next week, hopefully, to share his stories, maybe from this conference and his travel adventures, which he usually has many, many fun stories.
Entertaining adventures, for sure.
For sure. So, but till then, we'll talk to everybody next week. That's all for this week's show. Be sure to follow the Shared Security Show on Twitter and Instagram for the latest news and show updates. If you like this episode, please hit that like and subscribe button, and please subscribe to us on your favorite podcast listening app. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week for another episode of the Shared Security Show.